we'll get started. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce George Karystianis, who is a research fellow at UNSW. And George obtained his PhD in the multidisciplinary areas of text mining and epidemiology from the University of Manchester in 2014, and has since then been working as a medical informatician for the design and implementation of text mining systems from various unstructured biomedical data. One of the most recent examples of text mining involved the identification of biases in animal-based research. And another interesting area of work that he's been doing is in relation to extracting information from police records, which is what he is here to talk to us today about. So I'm really excited to be introducing George and delighted that he was able to present to our webinar today. I've been really interested in his research, both in terms of the variety of the work that he's doing, but also in terms of the techniques he's been using to extract data from various different record types. So what George will talk to us today about is his text mining domestic violence police event narratives. And in this project, George and his collaborators designed, evaluated, and implemented a text mining methodology in a large data set of police narratives to identify automatically key information for individuals involved in family domestic violence. This research demonstrated the feasibility of text mining techniques to yield unique insights for family domestic violence surveillance at a population level, and the capacity for the insight generated to contribute to predicting future offences within the area of family domestic violence. This is a particularly relevant area at the moment in the Australian policy space, so this is very topical research. And I'm really excited to hear what it is that George has to say. The preference for questions today is if you could hold your questions until the end, and once George has finished the presentation, I'll get around to questions. If you could ask your questions either by hitting the raise hand emoji or putting them in the chat function, and I'll try to attend to them in first come, first serve basis. So thank you very much, George. Over to you.
Thanks, Katrina, for the wonderful introduction and for inviting me to talk about my research here at UNSW. Feel free to ask me any questions. This research is quite cross-disciplinary, and hopefully I will not overload you with information and you will find the presentation smooth. So, I think I have to share my screen, right? So let's see. I assume you can see this sharing screen and there's no problems. Okay, awesome. All right, so we are here to talk about text mining of domestic violence police event narratives. My full name is George Christopher Karystianis. It's very long, it's very Greek. Gotta keep the tradition there. I'm a research fellow at the Justice Health Research Program under Professor Tony Butler. And we just relocated roughly, I can't remember, 7 months ago to the School of Population Health within UNSW. So before I begin, some acknowledgements. This work would have not been possible without an initial grant from the Australian Institute of Criminology. It was a minor grant that allowed me to get this current position that I hold right now and to create this very wonderful project and collaborate with lots of people. And of course, the New South Wales Police Force, who were very collaborative and willing to see the results of this type of research. Now, I'm sure you're aware some key information about the unfortunate problem of domestic violence. It's a very important public health problem. It primarily affects women, but also people of all ages. It's a very complex phenomenon. It has a large range of risk factors, and there could be quite a few consequences, such as stigmatization, post-traumatic stress, depression, substance abuse, increased health costs, and so on. Now, the most recent statistics by the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare mentioned that 1 out of 6 women experience physical and sexual violence by a current or a former partner, and 1 out of 16 men as well experience physical and sexual violence by a partner. There has been recordings of one woman is getting murdered per week here in Australia, and there are estimates that the annual burden against women from domestic violence is roughly $20 billion. Now, there is some estimates in regards how much costs can be saved if we prevent the incidence of violence towards women. Roughly $20,000 in costs can be saved for each instance. And if this reduced by 10%, almost $1.6 billion in costs can be avoided. Now, we have the police data, which is a very interesting source of information. So yearly here in New South Wales, the police attends roughly more than 100,000 domestic violence events, which is quite a lot and surprising to me, but I'm European. They accumulate lots of textual records that contain lots of information on victims and perpetrators of domestic violence, such as mental health status, the type of abuse types they are occurring towards the victim, the sustained victim injuries, whether there's been drug abuse or alcohol use involved in this domestic violence incident, any stated threats that the perpetrator might say, harm the victim, third person, and so on. However, these data sources have been probably underused in research, and it's very hard to access, obviously, for confidential purposes, because the information is very sensitive, and it hasn't been widely used in domestic violence research and reporting purposes. Now, before I progress to the project, I would like to take this opportunity to describe how the police data in New South Wales look. So we have the domestic violence police records, and these are compromised initially from what we call the fixed fields. Now, the fixed fields is standardized columns that contain demographic information for the people involved in a domestic violence event. For example, the age, the date of birth, the postcode where the event has happened, the type of offense according to the police, such as grievous bodily harm or murder, manslaughter, things like that. They even have weapon classes, so they classify if objects have been used to harm a victim as gym equipment or blunt instrument, knives, and so on. Now, on the other hand, you have at the same time, complementary to the fixed fields, what we call the event narratives. Event narratives are exactly what their name suggested they are. So it's basically when a police officer attends, they record in long and descriptive text what has happened according to the victim, according to the perpetrator, any witnesses involved, and what they themselves have observed. So it's mostly relying on their observations of what other people have been saying. So it definitely includes information that it's easily observable. For example, victim injuries. If someone has been stabbed, they record down, this person has sustained severe stab injuries. I've noticed drug, alcohol, abuse. So they might actually write down as well causes of the event. So they fought over a particular argument. One record of domestic violence by the police can have more than one narrative. That means that sometimes the police officers, once they lodge in their narratives for this particular domestic violence event, they might recollect other important information. So they go back and they add another narrative because there was a child involved and they forgot about it and so on, especially if it's happening 4 in the morning, which we can all understand, sometimes you forget information. So my main point is they can vary from length. Usually they can be from 1 page to maybe even 20 pages, depending how serious the event is. So this is basically a goldmine of information on potential mental illness, abuse types, stated threats, and victim injuries, and which is what mostly this project is focusing about. Now, this is an example of a fictional narrative. I don't know if it's very clear. Obviously, it has been black, I guess, or highlighted, de-highlighted, I don't know, for information, for sensitive purposes. This is how it looks. I don't know if you can see my cursor as well, but these 2 pieces here with the I don't know how you call them, full stops or something, means that the narrative was going too long and I had to cut it. So you can see that there is lots of text here, and on the top is narrative 1 out of 2. And then further down, you have this, what we call structure headings, evidence of effects, alcohol, they say nil. They have a diagnosis, well, diagnosis of mental health and other issues, or victims diagnosed with schizophrenia, firearms, and so on. So this is a typical narrative. Okay. Now, what's the problem with these narratives? They have an excessive, we have an excessive large number of narratives that is very impossible for us to manually inspect them or evaluate them or so on. I mean, you can take a sample, obviously, but if yearly the police officers attend roughly more than 100,000 domestic violence events, and each one has minimum 1 page, it's frankly impossible to go and look at them all to do any type of research. So the length, the context as well is a problem. I mean, it's not the happiest thing to read someone murdering another person in graphic detail. That's not what you want to do, although somebody has to do it. But anyway, so these problems, like I said, is impossible to do manual inspection or manipulating. They can be emotional draining. Of course, people cannot take it anymore. And, you know, we need to find another way of doing this faster and more efficient. So BOXAR, which is the Bureau of Crime Stats and Research here in New South Wales, they said that there is no way to extract information for these police narratives other than manual review, which I thought that was very interesting. Anyway, so based on what they said, that's how we came up with this project, and we thought, okay, let's see what can we do there. It might be an unsuccessful experiment, it might be a partial success. So what can we do right now, right? We need tools that they are giving us the ability to automatically identify information from these police narratives. So this is where text mining comes to the rescue. So what is text mining in layman terms, avoiding any technical jargon? Text mining is basically the identification of targeted information from unstructured data. What is unstructured data? Unstructured data is basically any data in the form of text, right? It can be narratives, health records, epidemiological abstracts, in our case, police records. Well, how does text mining works? And this is again in layman terms. It takes into consideration the way we write our language, the context, the syntax, the grammar, and of course it depends on the methodology you're applying. Well, how do I know that text mining can be good, or why should I invest my time for this type of methodologies, right? Well, an example here is that there have been studies that proven the feasibility of text mining in clinical text. Of course, these are some examples here, but there is other examples in other types of text, particularly now very hot topic is with mining and emotion analysis. So why do we need text mining, right? So let's be honest, and that includes myself, a human will never, ever be 100% accurate when they are facing loads of data. We've seen that happening in hospital records, even with doctors, nurses, even the cops themselves that do mistakes. So imagine if your job is to go and inspect these and find every single mention of a potential mental illness. By the time you've probably done, what, 30 narratives, which I don't think you will do even 30 narratives in a day, you probably be tired, bored, unmotivated, you will do mistakes. So that's why if you apply text mining, it can be less laborious, less time consuming. No one gets tired except the person who's writing the system. So, and if you've done it correctly, then it allows the processing of large amounts of data in a relatively short amount of time. So what is the aims of this project? We just wanted to create a text mining system that enables the identification of mental illnesses for offenders and perpetrators, offenders and victims of domestic violence, victim injuries, and various abuse types that have been recorded by police officers. At the end, our evil plan was to combine this extracted information with the fixed fields, so join them together, and then use the text set to do predictive modeling, use it for surveillance purposes, actually link it with external data sources such as health records, mental illness, and so on. Now, our data, and this is where we get to the meat of the research after this kind of long introduction. We got almost 500,000 of police records, which is quite a lot. And that includes people who had a record of the offense of domestic violence between January 2005 2016. Or just to avoid the question why it stops in 2016, this is where Anne came aboard and the project kick-started. So it started literally 2017. That's why they cut it there. However, for some unknown reason or some cosmic entity intervened, the police decided to give us only physical assault cases. It's very, very interesting because that's 500,000. So if you include other types of abuse, such as social, sexual, and so on, there have been more. Also, any events that had underage perpetrators, and that include cases of stalking and harassment, were denied. So our cases also exclude all these things. So they exclude underage perpetrators, sexual abuse, and so on. So before we text mine, what we did was we took a sample of 200 domestic violence events, which was roughly 450 pages, double-sided, that we had to manually inspect. So you can imagine how bulky it was. These were randomly selected. We created what we call the training set. So we actually use professionals with guidelines to highlight mentions of the 4 concepts that we were interested in, which is the mental illness, abuse types, victim injuries, and threats. So I use experts in domestic violence and forensic psychiatry, and we actually checked also whether they agreeing with the annotations. We had, I think, agreement above 90%. I think it was 91. It's published in papers in more detail, which ensured us that we have reliable and consistent training set to too much animations. We created various dictionaries of things that we were interested in, such as mental illness. Dictionaries include abbreviations, especially for mental illness, OCD, ADHD, PTSD. We also include other synonyms. So you can have schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia, which is not synonyms, variations of the mental illness, basically, or the abuse types, the injuries. We also include common misspellings that police officers will do. You'll be surprised how many times police officers here in New South Wales write schizophrenia. It's very interesting. Anyway, also for the threats that you can see here, besides inspecting the training set, we added the most common threats that somebody can say to someone. So we have to be a bit creative, unfortunately, to how people express their intention to harm, kill, or whatever. So that was probably the toughest emotional part here. You probably think your ex-boss or something like, okay. So this is our second method. We combine these dictionaries with rules. What are rules? So rules basically are common lexical patterns in text that indicate the presence of any of the concepts of interest. An example here can be victim suffers from anxiety, POI, which stands for person of interest, has been prescribed medication for his schizophrenia. So the rules combined with the dictionaries get triggered and you get the extraction of the concept of interest. Of course, we take into consideration negation, because sometimes you might say victim doesn't suffer from anxiety. So these things have to be taken into consideration. Or they might say victim's mother suffers from anxiety. So you want to avoid cases that you extract for family members or the witnesses. So these are just very simple rules I put here for understanding. The system is vastly more complex than that. And we use GATE, which is a very cool framework from the University of Sheffield, to incorporate the system and create a pipeline that can process this in real time and spits out the outcome. So how do we know these are all good? I mean, these are all fancy smancy, but have you evaluated this somehow? We did. We took 100 events, randomly chosen again, and we tried to have these events. We tried to select events randomly. we select random events that they still had mentions of mental illness, abuse types, and stuff. They were not empty. We use again the same forensic experts to annotate, and then we compare without seeing this cluster of events, the annotations of the experts with our system. So as I said here as well, an event can have more than one mention of any of the concepts. So you can have multiple threats, different types of abuse. You can have more than one mental illness for a perpetrator, or mental illnesses for both perpetrators and victims at the same time. So our precision, which is roughly the accuracy of identifying the correct concepts, was quite good. For the abuse types, we got 90%. We had a total of 44 different abuse types. We also had, for victim injuries was 86%. And for mental illness was an average one of 92%. So we had mental illness for perpetrators and mental illness for victims. So the average was 92%. I think one was 97 and the other was 89. I can't remember, so I can give the average. And we identified a total of 126 mental illnesses. This is very interesting because you would assume how the police officer is recording something more than depression, or, you know, these are the terms that everyone is using. I'm depressed, or I want to kill myself. But then you have oppositional defiance disorder, major depressive episode, single case. You think, okay, this is worth exploring. Before I get the text mining question, I do have recalls and F-scores. I just gave precision, so happy to discuss this more if someone asks me for that. So next one. If you want to do this manually, we calculated that it will take you 250 plus years, and that includes annual leave and bank holidays included, just to extract the mental illnesses. So if you go to 500,000 records and you want to identify mental illness for victims and perpetrators, I use my time and multiplied it. It will take you 250 years, assuming you've done everything correct. So that's pretty funny, at least. Are you ready for the actual results, which I think this is what most people are excited for. They don't care about the methodology, it's technical. So here's some results at a holistic level. So on the left side, you have the number of domestic violence events that had mental illness identified for both victim or perpetrator together, and without mental illness. So you can see you've got roughly 78,000 events that have a mention of mental illness for either a victim or a perpetrator, which is this little chunk there. Looks like a Pac-Man, if you think about it. And then in this side, you have the number of mental illnesses in total, by excluding duplicates, of course. So we had 81,000 mentions of mental illness for perpetrators and 21,000 mentions of illness for victims. So just to clarify, there might be cases that the victim has more than one mental illness. So that's why the numbers are higher. So if I have PTSD and schizophrenia, that's 2 here. Sorry, here I'm pointing because my screen is here and I'm looking down. So I'm using, I miss the good old days when you speak to live audience. Anyway, this is the same for the abuse types and the victim injuries. So on the right side, you have the number of events that had at least one recorded injury, which is 180,000. On the other hand, on the right side, you have the number of events that have at least one recorded abuse type. So that was roughly 351,000 events. Obviously, there were some events that there was no abuse occurring, or we didn't include our abuse in our system, which we're going to talk about that later. So overall, out of 44 types of abuse types, 351 events had at least one of them. These are the results of mental illnesses. So we classified our mental illnesses at the International Classification Disease, the 10th revision on the first level, or the first node if you want. And we have added as well our own nodes. We added 8 extra nodes for cases that the ICD didn't have, such as hear them, like medication antidepressants. Why did that category? Because obviously it's a sign that when someone says I'm taking Zoloft or I don't know, things like that, we thought we shouldn't lose a deformation. Maybe it doesn't tell us much, but maybe we can keep it. That's why we put it as level 1. So you can see that the mood disorders were first. That includes for anyone who doesn't have any background in mental health, depression, bipolar, and so on. So they are quite prevalent for both perpetrators and victims, which is very interesting. You also have intentional self-harm. People who self-harm themselves, unfortunately, when they found themselves in this type of events. Another example could be we had disorders of adult personality and behavior. The total number of mental illness group 26. That includes the 8 that we added ourselves, which is 4 categories of medications, which is antidepressants, anti-anxiety, and we added as well unspecified mental disorder, which you can see here. It's overwhelmingly the largest on perpetrators. That means the police officer wrote, well, he's clearly suffering from a mental disorder. Obviously, that means potentially nothing, but it might be something, which links us to the future work we're going to talk later on. Now, what we also did, we classified these mental illnesses on the second level. So sometimes they were. So the second level here of ICD, then you can see the illnesses are more specific, detailed. For example, you have bipolar disorder, which is part of the mood affective disorders, specific personality disorders, which is a node, right? And then we will see it further down the line. And it's amazing that you think police officers are recording all this. If my memory serves me right, I think we. That's why I put the top, I think they're the top 15, okay? You have obsessive compulsive disorder. The injury of a specified body region is basically a suicide. Like he actually died, but they recorded as injury of specified body region in ICD-10, which means then if you drill down, it's a suicide, I think. You also have ADHD, schizophrenia. Now, the same thing, we went also to the third level. So third level, even more specified mental illnesses with post-traumatic stress disorder, oppositional defiant disorder. I didn't even know that thing existed. So every day for me, borderline personality disorder. Again, this one had lots of, we got loads of mental illness. Oh, and you think a police officer will go and write he's suffering from oppositional defiance disorder. I mean, I have a medical background. Exploring, that's what we thought in this. So here are the results for the abuse types. At the bottom, you see that most of them, they will write assault unspecified. So assault unspecified, it will include cases like smacking and clipping and bashing. So these are very generic terms. So I personally put them together after consulting with forensic psychiatrists and DV experts. I mean, what is bashing? Obviously, it's some form of harm, but it doesn't specify. Then we decided to keep things that they do bear more context, such as we had the 44 types, but obviously they don't fit here. So you got physical restraining is when someone grabs you and doesn't let you go. Scratching, which is more detailed. You have property damage, punching, kicking, breaching of their ADVOs, attempt to hit the victim with an object or any form of weapon. You have choking, which should be probably strangulation, really. Spitting, and the more you go detailed further up, you'll get tearing of nails. It gets really gruesome. Setting someone on fire, burning them. Very happy things. Anyway, we also have a slide with explicit threats. They've been, how do you call this thing, unhighlighted or highlighted for, it's pretty graphic. So I put the most common ones, which is, of course, any form, I'm killing you, I'm gonna kill you, I'll kill ya, and all that. you can see that it's more specific. I'm going to stab you, slit your throat. Probably people pass by my room, they will say, what is this guy talking about? There is threats for sexual abuse. And again, the lower you go, the more variation you get. There is also attempts to harm a third person or pets or the house itself. And this is based on our original work, which I've done back in 2017-18, and this has been vastly expanded, especially with the project we're doing with Boxer, which I'm going to talk about later. Anyway, these are the victim injuries. Because I'm looking at the time as well, I don't want to talk too much. Most common form, which is not surprising, was bruising, and it's the most easily observable form of injury that the police officers can see. Very difficult to hide unless you're wearing clothing. You also have lots of cuts or abrasions, and again, the lower you go, the more you get like broken teeth and fractures and lumps and bleeding and all these wonderful things that they're associated with domestic violence. Now, all is great, but we do have limitations. This is far from perfect. When we conceive the original dictionaries, of course, there could be abuse types that we never thought of. For example, maltreatment, caging someone, throwing acid in their face. You know, there is so many things that people unfortunately can be creating but hurting others. A larger variety of injury types as well. Like we try to use the most common injury types based on emergencies, like cuts, stab wounds, and fractures. But there could be cases that some of the injuries could be so specific that we didn't incorporate it. If they say severe, severing the artery or things like that. So these are excluded. Probably if we include those, you'll get a more graphic picture as well. So there were cases as well that the system doesn't pick up everything. It's far from perfect, like you see from the precision. So there will be cases that the mental illnesses had a different common syntactical pattern that I haven't seen or the system hasn't seen, so it might not pick it up, or it might be written in a way, it might have like so many misspellings and errors or being full of symbols sometimes that the system doesn't recognize words, and you think, okay. So the method though is very generic to apply it for other offenses. Folks are right now. So we took actually a massive set now, again, police narratives, 500,000 to search for quantity control. We adapted this system with stalking 48 non-physical abuse types now, which is harassment by letter, email, visits, gifts, stalking with cars, stalking in your location, in your house. And actually, I'm going this week to apply on this 500,000. We've done experiments. It works very nice on 1,000 narratives. So, and it's based on the same system, which is good because that gives us the replica to apply it again and see whether it works. So, okay, to link the fixed fields data with the extracted information and then link it with mental health records. We've done that, and we use this massive data set of 500,000 to predict hands-on and hands-off offenses. We kept it very generically as hands-on, hands-off, and it was very promising because we didn't have any biases in our system. We just put it on a black box of deep learning and see what happened. Does it work? And it works. It definitely needs adjustments and funding. So we just published it actually this February, like middle of February. So it's brand new work. I think, to the best of my knowledge, probably first of its kind, and this huge sample. And with this method, we also just published last year autism and domestic violence based on this data, on this population data. And we also published just on Christmas Day the mental health prevalence in New South Wales in domestic violence through these records. Now, talking about it and do some descriptive statistics, and it's open to discussion for people to come in, help us interpret it, or open the discussion for linking more data, verify them. Now, we just got accepted 2 papers. Both of them accepted the same day, which I thought that was double whammy. We got non-fatal strangulation, domestic violence. That was the abuse type that you saw as choking. We had an expert on non-fatal strangulation. She led the paper. Very interesting analysis about the forms of strangulation. And we also just got accepted, and I think it's already online for people to read, domestic violence in nursing homes, which we explore what's happening, which is also very prevalent. And we found out, again, unfortunate findings. It really makes you feel like humans are terrible. Now, currently, we have submitted data linkage. This is what we linked all our data, because we got ethics approval, to link it to the respective health records of people involved in domestic violence, perpetrators, victims, with mental health diagnosis from emergency departments and hospital admissions. So we only got the severe ones. And it's really cool because, funny thing, they kind of agreeing with what the police would write. And that's what the paper is examining, because we see that, okay, the police officer who wrote that George has schizophrenia and he's attacking his partner, actually he has a mental health record in, I don't know, hospital. So our goal on this paper is to explore, is the police writing basically garbage, because the witness opposite the street said, well, I saw George waving his hand, he must be crazy. Or George said he's crazy, maybe George knows what he has, or George's partner knows. So that was very interesting. And we also have this other paper we call domestic violence surveillance, that we demonstrate why the police data, what type of information the police data bring on board through text mining for surveillance purposes, from understanding people's ethnicity, if it's been included or not, from gender proportions, the mental illnesses between offenders and victims and between genders. It's fascinating stuff. It's definitely police data, they're not the holy grail of data, but it's an untapped source of data that can be used complementary with other forms of research in this area. So that's what we are arguing. Now, okay, I'm seeing the time. I will aim to finish in 2 minutes. So the first study, as I said, it's predicting domestic violence. So look hands-on, hands-off, and breach of videos. As I said, we use all the extracted and linked information. We use deep learning, and we compare it with the just native base. And then this is our results. We got 76% for hands-on, 73% for hands-off, 80% for advo breach. We realized the more specific offense, the better the prediction. But because we had just a label, hands-off, it was penduluming. So we need something more complex, like murder, or which we have in our possession, or I don't know, manslaughter, to help us look this stuff. And we found out that adding more data related to perpetrators and victims actually helps us achieve a better accuracy. Second study, which I mentioned, was from Autism and DV. Basically, the main finding here, so I'm just trying to save us some time, was there was no tendency for autistic adults to commit domestic violence against their spouses or partners, despite what people, sensationalism, media, and all this, which is terrible. I have a new slogan. I call the journalists the new scientists. It's like, they just write stuff and it's just like whatever. Anyway, so that's based on population data from police that has happened. And it's a very important finding. Stop demonizing people. Anyway, I'll stop somewhere. I don't want to get passionate. The third study, which was the prevalence of our mental illness from domestic violence police records, we limited on single-to-single perpetrators and victims, because sometimes if you have 2 perpetrators or 3 perpetrators involved and you extract a mental illness, you don't know to who it goes. Maybe they all have it, maybe one has it. And we wanted to be fair. I didn't have time to put that on the system because the police was like, you better get out of our headquarters, man. So I was like, okay, I'll do whatever I can as fast as I could. And we found out, yeah, there is interesting trends of mental across age groups, which I'm going to show. Depression was common, as you know. Mental illness was common on very young offenders, 0 to 14. Obviously, there's no one at 0, but it's just a group. And on victims over 65 years old. Now, here's some very interesting slide for you. Hopefully, it's very clear. You can see some interesting trends for perpetrators. Things not for victims. Okay, from victim age groups. So, for example, you can see that the color here is. Oh my God, I'm wearing glasses and I'm partially blind. Apologies. I think that's dementia. Got it. So that's dementia specified, and you can see it just goes up, and that's proportions. Okay, so we've adjusted it for everyone, and you can see that these people are experiencing an excruciating amount of. And I'm saying this, and I have goosebumps of being victimized. Anyway, also we have that's attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, which makes sense for younger ages. People, I guess, don't know how to handle it, or they call the police. Who knows? Maybe they're babysitters. I don't know. We don't know the context, and as well the pervasive developmental disorder as well. And then it makes sense that kind of slide down as they go into adulthood, and maybe they do alcohol and drug abuse. Who knows? Now, this is a very interesting slide for perpetrators. The red big one is, well, not that one. Oh, it disappeared anyway. So the red big one, apologies, is alcohol abuse. This goes all the way up. It's very interesting, isn't it? Probably doesn't tell us anything we don't know, I guess, but it's good to verify it from roughly 420,000 events that include 244,000 perpetrators. Again, this one here, I think is dementia unspecified. And the big one again is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It's very interesting. And the big one here is just depression, which is consistent for all groups. Now, and I finished this last slide. These are published studies. And today you get a bonus because besides that, we published a conversation piece lately in January 2021. We discussed about how these findings could potentially help people. We also got 3 more publications in the Australian Institute of Criminology, and they are supposed to be published today about our work. So that's bonus routes for you. 7 and 8 are the studies, as I said, they got accepted on May. And, you know, like you see, we're trying to, you know, to support this project as best as we can by including so many people in the conversation to make us explore. You know, maybe the data are completely rubbish, or maybe they are very solid, but so far it seems that they have quite a few promising outputs. This is the research thing, by the way, as many as I could fit. So you can see it's just not like me going out as a text miner with epidemiological background and computer science. I'm a completely like 3 composition. Anyway, ignore me. So the whole project is led by Professor Tony Bell by UNSW, and these are the main contributors on this type of work. And on that note, and it's 40 minutes, I think I finished. Sorry, that was a long one. I'm so sorry, but I tried to cram it as much as I could. So I'm gonna stop sharing as well, or maybe I should leave it if people have questions. Maybe I can.
Thank you so much, George, for that really interesting and lively, notwithstanding the subject matter, presentation. And I appreciate the fact that you were sensitive to the fact that the audience of these webinars can be quite mixed. And so presenting it kind of in a lay manner as well is really helpful. You mentioned that most people will be interested in the results. We're a big old group of nerds, so there'll be a lot of questions about methods, I expect, and I can see them coming in. I have a lot of questions myself, but I'll be a gracious host and I'll let other people get theirs answered first. So the first ones come from Dixon, who asks 2 questions. 1, how do you determine events and associated attributes like perpetrator, victim, location, etc.? And then as a follow-up to that, how do you ensure the attributes associated to a particular event does not get associated to a different event when these events occur in the same report? And if you require supplementary information, I'll ask Dixon to unmute and just explain further if that's required.
Sorry, I didn't hear the question. I have internet problems. Can you just, sorry, repeat it? It just went in slow motion and then it just cut off.
Okay, I'll go again. So Dixon asks, how do you determine events and associated attributes like perpetrator, victim, and location? And how do you ensure that the attributes associated to a particular event doesn't get associated to a different event when these events occur in the same report?
Gotcha. Okay, so the first question is, so each event, so I'm getting a bit technical, hopefully I'm not going to confuse, each event is its own file. The way I've written the text mining system is when you do extraction on one file, everything is just associated with that event. So there is no mixing whatsoever. Now, in terms of perpetrators and victims, the text mining system has subparts that is one for perpetrators only. So anything you extract, remember in my example, I said victim suffers from schizophrenia. Victim, let's call it, is a semantic anchor. So I know it's a victim. I said to the text mining system, that's a victim, it's not a perpetrator. So it's like I'm pointing the system, that's a victim, that's a perpetrator, based on the rules, if that makes sense. So you will never get something like, he was violent towards her. Who is he? Maybe it's the victim, or maybe if there are cases that somebody would write, well, the victim fought back and punched him. So if the text mining system was very generic, then you would have got punch as an abuse type from a perpetrator's perspective. But the way I've done it is it has to have perpetrator, offender, you know, like these semantic anchors. That's why I mentioned the precision first. So precision is to eliminate these false positives, right? It might be problematic because it can generate false negatives, which could be George, who is a perpetrator, hit the victim and then continually went to punch her in the face. You might lose the punch in the face, but at least I know what I've done is from George. I mean, from the victim, from the perpetrator, not from me. You know what I mean? So that's why. That's how I've done it with the attributes. And that's why when you further progress to the prevalence of mental illness, I use single to single to avoid being biased. You know, if someone, if it's a single perpetrator versus a single victim, then you definitely know that the mental illness of the perpetrator belongs only to this guy, not if there are 2, 3, 4, 5 perpetrators. Does that make sense? I don't know if I answered the question full, but this is how we've done it. It's a little bit...
So George, follow up to that. Does that mean you pre-process each of the event, I mean, the report manually to determine the event and the perpetrator and the victim during your annotation? Do you pre-process? Does this mean you pre-process each of the report by annotating whether who the victim is and who the perpetrators are?
Let me show you. No, that's the beauty of it, by using the rules. Going as fast as I can. Okay, here. So I've written different sets of rules for victims and perpetrators. So when they get identified, so for example, these two are not together. One is the text mining system for perpetrators. So everything that gets extracted is assigned to perpetrators. And I have another one that's for victims. That's how I've done it. That saves me the annotation process, as you correctly pointed out, because I've used semantic anchors in 2 different systems. One is just for victims and the other just for perpetrators.
Okay, thank you. Very clear.
Very welcome.
Thanks, George. Okay, so the next question that we've got is from Simon Angus, and he asks, when you conduct prediction, does this mean that you have, for example, K events involving the same perpetrator, victim, so the same perpetrator-victim coupling, and you use K-1 events to predict, for example, violence in the K most recent event? And in which case, how did you decide on the train test split field validation?
That's a very good point. I'll try to answer it as best as I can because I am not a machine learner or predictive person. The person is not here, but what we've done, what is the predictive? So basically, as far as I remember, the machine learner that we used, she was an amazing person. She did deep learning as well. She did the typical split, I think 80 to 20%. I have to check the paper as well. And she used the window, basically. So we used people who have more than 2 events, because there's no point of having people who just did 1 event and, they just, I don't know, yelled. And then the second event, they just broke something. We thought to go more to capture those who are systematically into our set. So there were people who have done 3, 4, 5. But indeed, if let's say one person has done 4 events, right? We took 3 and aimed to predict 4. So if somebody has done 5, we took 4 and aimed to predict the 5th one. So that's how we've done it. We use this window, if in quotes, if that makes sense. And then we also decided, because we just applied the methodology and we're running out of funding for her to do the experiments, we decided, oh, maybe we should just apply a simple methodology to see will that work, because this paper is not a paper that demonstrates 100% that prediction is absolute and it's right, let alone the ethical parts that they definitely have to be discussed. We just want to see, it's like a pilot study, if that makes sense, a feasibility. So that's why we use this window and this perpetrator event. Our evil plan for future, when we get funding, is to actually go down to even the singular event. So if they're done 2, from one to another, but really down to very, very serious things. Because if just a person who is George next door, he constantly yells, and he's been on the system 7 times, it doesn't really tell you much. But if George was the first system, he says, I'm gonna kill you, and the next event he can't did it, then that's what we wanna do. But it definitely requires further exploration, see if it's feasible as well. So this is not a holy grail, just a pilot study to clarify, and that's why we're not pushing for implementation with the police or anything like that. And we welcome any feedback in regards as well to the ethical side of it, because this is not an algorithm to go and use and say, well, George is gonna do it, and we go full Minority Report, and then you go a Grammy, and we want to avoid bias as well, overrepresentation, like quite a few of the American systems, and I'm digressing here, sorry, they put too many positive cases of a certain group, and obviously the system will always point, like, come on, man, I mean, this is common sense here. So that's what we're trying to do. So we're going slow and methodological. So I hope I answer your question best. Happy to take the question even by email, because I don't have the technical person here to explain even further the process that she used, because even for me, it was just a black box.
Okay, thanks. I see Klaus had his hand up as well. He might have a similar line of questions.
Yeah, Klaus,
hi.
did you ask?
Okay, so I mean, how can this? Okay, so let's start with this prediction we just talked about. So how can this be imagined to be used? Like, I mean, the evaluation method of any machine learning method should represent reality, but the way it is phrased now, that the test set is constructed in a way that, of course, you will get the high predictions. You will not have that in reality. So how could that be used? I mean,
you're asking the $1 million question. My evil plan with this work was to see, because we use, as I said, deep learning methods, which I'm not familiar with, and I thought it would be really cool to just see it and see if it actually gives us any positive or encouraging results.
Okay, no. Let's not talk about methods. The conditions for prediction is that you have some data coming in, and then you have predictions. Okay.
Yes.
So how would you do that? so if you say you are predicting, yeah, you need to have data coming in. I think I missed it. So what would be the data that would come in that is used for predicting?
Right. So the evil plan, well, obviously I don't think it's going to happen now or in the immediate future, whatever. That would be police data of people. So this is where we go into the dangerous territory of profiling, if that makes sense. So if I go into the system and I am, I don't know, George, this age, blah, 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 and he has this record, can we use my information based on the previous perpetrators and offenders who have likelihood of doing something to see whether I'm gonna do something? Does that make sense?
Okay, so, but in your prediction exercise,
yes,
what is that actually doing then? Because then this is not actually any prediction exercise.
Well, it's prediction from the perspective that we already know the outcome. We're just trying to predict it. So all these people have offenses under their names. The 420,000 events we've used, they all have offenses under their name. That's the prediction. We're trying to predict the offense of people who are already in the system.
Oh, so is the goal to predict the offense based on the new text?
No, okay. Let me explain again. So the original exercise, right? So you and I, we are in the system, victim perpetrator, and I have now under my belt the offense of assault, okay? So I've done it to you more than 3 times. So the way this methodology worked, I try to predict the 3rd time. Now, as you correctly point out, what is that saying for the future? If another person who has similar characteristics with us come into the system, can we use his characteristics based on what other people have done to predict whether that person is going to do assault, murder, manslaughter? So it's like profiling.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But the way you should have tested this is train on different people and then try on new people. Like, not if you predict in a window, then there's no point of doing that.
Well,
it's meaningless.
No, it is meaningless. I respectfully disagree, because we wanted to see whether we can use demographic characteristics and mental health diagnosis to see whether these people that are in the system, they have an additional event that we can predict, which they did. And it worked.
Yeah, but it's you're predicting a trend. That's not, I mean, yes,
Sorry?
You're predicting a trend within a series, which might be that's a different thing. You're predicting a trend within a series of crime events. So if I have a burglar in one house, there's a high chance of having a burglar in the next house. That's the same thing here. But the true test is you take a series of events and train on different people and then predict on new people who have a series of events.
Yes, I agree. And this is part of our future work. And like I said before, these are very sensitive data. I can't go and send the police, okay, I want now 500,000. You know, they don't do that. So I had to work with what I have.
You can split your data. You can split your data.
Sorry?
No, that's the thing. So you have the data to do that.
The data have been split.
Yes, but you split.
But the data
I think we should probably move on to some other
20%.
questions, because we're getting a little bit bogged down in this debate.
One more thing. Do you know how good the police officers are in recording mental illness? Like, are there certain police officers who are better at recording this?
In terms of,
I lost connection. I didn't hear.
Oh, are different police officers better at recording mental illness than others? And this is there a way, for example, for training purposes, to say, okay, what actually determines why some officers are better at writing down than others?
That's difficult to answer, because they all get the same training. They do get a little bit of mental health training for 2 to 4 days to record the mental illness, because the main point here is mental illness, which is a bit more difficult to identify. It all comes down, it's very subjective, really. It all comes down to the individual officer, the time of the event. As I said very early, if you are doing it at 4 in the morning, you might forget things, and that's why you go back and you redo, you added another narrative. The majority of the police officers that I've seen, which obviously we don't know who writes these, I didn't have access for that, they tend to be quite thorough, because it's, you know, when you see them in any cop shows on TV movies, they go, oh, you know, I have to do this paperwork. They really have to write everything in detail. And especially if there's also a partner with them, they have to do the same thing. So they tend not to, they have a standard of, you know, you have to write, for example, the demographic characteristics, definitely, the type of the offense, the type of the abuse, the type of circumstances. So these are very key things if there are witnesses. So they kind of maintain a standard. Of course, you're going to have outliers left and right. Somebody will be overly descriptive and they might write 20 pages. And maybe you'll get some guy who might write half a page. But the majority of them, they have the same thing, really. You know, it's like standardized information, basically. And that's why they have the fixed fields, which is mostly, I would say 95% they're very, you know, complete, these ones. But the narratives, they complement information to them.
Okay. Thanks, George. So the next question comes from Genevieve, and I guess we'll keep on going through the questions. If you have to leave, obviously not you, George, you have to stay, but anyone else, if you have to leave, feel free to do so, and these questions will be captured in the webinar recording. So Genevieve's question is, really interesting work. Can you tell us about the reasons why police record, the mental illness data? I'm wondering whether they might have more reason to record offender mental illness versus for victims.
Okay, that's an interesting one. So again, this is more coming towards from, I guess, the police perspective, and I hope I understood the question. So I guess what the police officers are trying to do when they attend these events, and if a particular person showcases, you know, signs of, you know, any form of signs, really, they want to know whether, if they knew before that this person could have something or be able to recognize it, to diminish the catastrophic outcomes. Because sometimes, you know, when the police go there and let's say someone is waving a knife on them, they kind of get shot. They are interested in that aspect, so they can diminish.
George, can I say, I mean, I think that a person named JK is maybe thinking along the same lines as me. Like, I think the police have an incentive to record the offender data very accurately because it's relevant to prosecution, you know, to working out, you know, maybe the state of mind of an offender.
That was my second part, yeah.
And I guess what I'm asking is whether there might be reason to think that there could be a bit less accuracy around the victim mental illness data, because there might not be as much of a reason for the police to capture that.
That is actually a very good point, and that's why I was saying these data are obviously far from perfect. You know, nobody can say, like, any data are far from perfect. Mm. But I think most of the cases, at least in New South Wales, I'm speaking, right? I know what usually when the incident involved, they tend to involve a female victim. They tend to send female officers, so they can record if they have any sign of mental illness. I don't want to call it even mental illness, you know what I mean? If they are distressed and they have suicidal thoughts. I agree that probably they record more for perpetrators because, you know, once they go to court, they can be charged, especially if they resist arrest, and, you know, they do quite the rockers. Unfortunately, there's no way of us be able to calibrate that.
No, and I can understand that. I guess for me, it was just a bit of I was surprised that there was, at the proportion, I suppose, of the, of the sort of the victim mental illness in the stats you presented. You know, I mean, given the prevalence of those things in the community, I mean. Which makes sense if you think about it. If I was a victim and somebody attacked me and I have any sort of mental illness or whatever, I probably wouldn't even tell it to police officers, say, oh, this guy is crazy. He's schizophrenic, he's hitting, you know, something like that. Or maybe there is a witness. Sometimes, most of them, there is like a family member or family say, well, this guy, you know, there is this tendency, as you said, to go straight to who has done it rather to who has endured it, because you want to minimize the risk, right? But what happened right now, with this type of work, the police is actually a strong partner of this one. They want to stop the fixed fields completely and put all the information on the narratives, and that includes the mental illness of victims. and its abuse types and its injuries. So to even put more detailed, because they've realized they are missing quite a few stuff with their standardized system. So I thought that was very interesting, and they want to scrap that, drop down menu, putting age, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, well, all these things are here. They want to now text mining that, and obviously, calibrate the system to be even better, to start spitting out information for victims. Because, for example, believe it or not, they won't record abuse types or injuries on their fixed fields. This information is brand new. It doesn't see the light of the day unless you go to court. So for them, they think, oh my God, there is all these detailed injuries and stab wounds and stuff that nobody's using. So maybe that's, the pathway for better dialogue and better data collection,
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
So we've just got a couple more coming through. So Irina has asked, is it possible to know the gender of the police who wrote the report? Are there more males at police stations?
That would probably be part of their police system, which I didn't have access. And yeah, I wouldn't be able to answer this.
Okay.
Sorry. Sorry, disappointing, anticlimactic answer. I'm sorry.
Yes, but I could see how it could be a potential control variable in a future prediction. And then the final question at the moment is Dixon again, who has raised the issue around bias in the current AI technique for building predictive model. How do we remove the bias in the data set, and what efforts are put into eliminating bias?
That's very interesting. So what we did with our method, we didn't focus on any demographic characteristics at all. We just wanted to see whether we can predict, like I have here, hands-on, hands-off, and advo breach. We never said that this the mentions of mental illness, the abuse types.
Sorry, George, you broke up a bit then.
Based on
can you go back a bit? You
okay.
broke up a bit, yeah.
Okay. Originally, in this data set, we didn't took for prediction any of the demographic characteristics. We didn't use them. We just used the text mining bits.
Yeah.
To avoid these biases.
George, I understand that, but the issue with bias is sometimes, what you have is bias creeps in unintentionally based on the bias of the person who made the report. Mm-hmm. It's an unconscious bias that creeps into the report. For example, if that person was a male chauvinist, he may be writing the report in a way that may disadvantage the victim, who might be a woman in this case. That way of writing that report has bias, his individual bias had gone into that report, and that is nothing to do with the demographic of the data set. But because you are analyzing the text and how those, the structure of the text, and then you're using pattern matching to match those things. What I'm concerned about is this unconscious bias of the person who is making the report potentially can creep into the report. And what I'm looking at is, are there ways or efforts that being put in to recognize this and see how this can be filtered out or eliminated?
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying, and to some extent I agree, but that's probably very difficult again to find out. I don't know if the police is doing something from that, because I only have access to the data. But considering what we've seen from the results, let's say that maybe they are 80%, 70% well representative. We haven't seen, for example, in the results, I encourage you to read the prevalence of mental illness in the paper. We haven't seen, for example, 80% mental illness mentions for female perpetrators, or female perpetrators stabbing male people. You know what I mean? It kind of represents what we have already in the literature in a similar level. So I agree there will be probably biases, but that's why we're constantly doing little settings like we did the nursing homes, for example, which is a very small study. We had only 700 events that have happened in this 10-year period, 12-year period. But if you go and look, the results you found, they're kind of similar to pretty much all the other studies that have been done, more thoroughly, less automatically, no text mining involved.
Yeah.
Emphasizing that there is a problem between carers and older female patients probably have dementia. So, you know what I mean? Like, if it was a bit...
George, I understand this is a very difficult issue. I think the whole world is, trying to, struggling with this issue of bias in building models. So I was just wondering if there was any effort in your current work that this issue is being tackled. But this is an ongoing challenge for all of us.
Yes, I agree. And
sorry, go ahead, George.
To that extent, obviously, the way the system works, like I said before, because it doesn't take demographics into even the prediction or the text mining, in theory, it's kind of been isolated. Now, obviously, these results are coming from, as you said, the text, which can be written depending the person and their beliefs and blah, blah, blah. And probably that conversation should go from, the beginning and how people, and I like to believe they're aiming that way, but I probably don't know what exactly they're doing. So I couldn't comment on, their practices.
Sure. Yeah, and if I can just put this into some context, there are limitations with all forms of data that are collected, and the data has to be taken at face value. So although every single police station may have had a slightly different way of recording this data, you can't interrogate and extract every aspect of that kind of bias. I mean, bias in the application of machine learning methods is not generally speaking about the nature of the data itself, although that is a factor. But, if we have survey data and the person who's collected the survey has done face-to-face interviews and they've mumbled one of their questions consistently and people haven't responded properly, that's a form of data that we can't exactly anticipate. Or maybe they've asked a question that they didn't really agree with of someone, and there's been an implicit bias in the response of the people responding. So all of these things are part of the challenge of working with big data and different data sources, and they're not unique to this project.
I personally agree with what you said, Katrina, and exactly. And this is all these things we've done. It's never about the absolute truth. It's just, first of all, let's see, do they agree with what people currently have been doing? And so far, people who are more into social care and the social research, it seems they're heading that way. Of course, there have been problems around them, 100%. Like any other data set, I said, if you've done medical analysis, medical text analysis, doctors are biased. If the kid goes there and says, I'm hurting, well, I don't care, he has fever. And then he leads to death, and then think, oh, well, oops. We are all humans. I totally agree with Dixon that obviously if a person has a particular strong belief, they might downplay significant aspects of this, more complex phenomenon. It's not like recording your movie, review. It's just somebody's getting hurt. But as a holistic approach, it seems like these data are heading the right way. And there's quite a few as well educational initiatives, I think, within the police to train police just to recognize this better. Like another aspect for this, if you think about it, there is bias against men of domestic violence, because you go to the police station, I was attacked. Well, you're a man. That's a bias. And that's also downplayed. So unfortunately, we're all biased. Like, I'm biased. I don't like watching romantic comedies, I really don't. But they say, come on, this one is better. So, I think it probably will take time to find the golden standard of reporting and collecting data in any field, really.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that's it for the questions at the moment, in case there are any last minute ones. I'll just give you a moment to raise your hand if you've got any. No. Okay, so I'd like to very much thank George for the time he spent presenting today, and for giving us some insight into his current and ongoing work in the area. It's been a really interesting presentation and has stimulated a lot of interesting debate and questions around certain dimensions of this sort of work. Thank you very much, George. Before we wrap up, I also would like to bring your attention to the next SODA Labs webinar, which is on the 8th of June, and that will be with Carolyn Lepenick, who is presenting on money, ideology, evidence from candidate manifestos. I encourage you all to read some of the work that George and his collaborators have produced, and follow up with him independently if you've got any further questions. So thank you very much, George.
You're very welcome. Thanks for the invitation and have a lovely day.
You too.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.